Have your shots been feeling uninspired lately? Sometimes, despite having a very interesting subject or location, our photos or videos end up looking pretty boring. Today, we're going to talk about 5 tips for better composition that will make your shots stand out. Tip number 1, rule of thirds. This is probably the first composition tip I learned when I got into photography and filmmaking, but it's simple and effective. Divide your frame into a 3x3 grid and position the key elements of your scene along the lines or at the intersections. For example, instead of having your horizon centered, move your horizon line into the lower third to show more verticality in your shot. Or if you're framing a portrait, consider framing the eye line of the subject on the top third. When you use the rule of thirds in a wider scene, by placing elements along the different lines or intersections, you end up creating a balanced and visually engaging shot. Tip number 2, frame within a frame. This composition technique uses elements within the scene to create a secondary frame around the main subject, like doorways, windows, or arches. This not only adds context, cluing in the viewer as to what they are looking at, but it also creates depth and focuses the viewer's attention on the subject. And it doesn't have to be a literal frame, it could be foreground elements like foliage that are placed on the edges of the shot to draw the viewer's attention in. Tip number 3, leading lines. This is one of my favorite techniques I see in shots. Use lines or leading elements in your shot to guide the viewer's eyes towards your focal point. These lines help create depth, structure, and a sense of direction in the image that draws the viewer into your shot. This way, not only does the environment that surrounds your subject provide context of where the shot was taken, but it also becomes a functional piece in framing your subject. When getting your shot, focus on how the environment surrounds your subject and use things like sidewalks, road lines, or tree lines to create this effect. Tip number 4, symmetry and balance. There's something extremely satisfying about symmetrical images. You can incorporate symmetry by balancing elements on either side of the frame. Whereas the last 3 tips focused on drawing the viewer's attention towards the subject, this technique focuses on building an overall image that feels harmonious and aesthetically pleasing. This can be as simple as making sure your subject is dead centered in the frame and that the frame doesn't have a ton of elements on just one side of the image. This technique really differentiates a shot from feeling like one that was taken on a whim versus one that was planned and taken with intention. Tip number 5, negative space. By utilizing the empty space around your subject, you can create a sense of balance, simplicity, and focus. Negative space can emphasize the subject of your image and provide a visual resting point for your viewer. On top of that, using negative space also removes visual clutter and distraction. You can create negative space by adding more of the out-of-focus background into the frame, or by adding more of a plain background into your frame, like the sky. There are dozens of composition techniques. There's the golden ratio, golden triangle, dynamic symmetry, converging lines, rule of odds, rule of space, utilizing patterns, composing with curves, composing with colors, using juxtaposition, repetition, texture, and so on. But the important takeaway is to immerse yourself into the study of composition to understand what makes an interesting image, to learn all of the rules and systems created by other talented photographers and filmmakers, and then once you understand how those rules work, then it's time for you to break those rules and start creating your own. So let's start turning our boring images into compelling ones by using these 5 composition tips. But hold on a second, maybe you've got a great eye for composition, but your images are turning out grainy and ruining your shots. Well, if you want to fix that, check out last week's video on the 1 setting you need to understand and master to always get clear and sharp images. That's it for this week's Technique Tuesday, and as always, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.